Hey everyone, it's Peter from Argo. We just put out a press release, an RNS, with our 2021 sustainability report. I'm going to walk you through the report. It's also on our website. You can download it. It's a PDF of about 12 slides. And just to kind of add some context to the press release, I'm going to walk you through the report. So here we go. All right. So this is the second year we've put out a sustainability report. We put one out in last year around the same time. It was our initial, what we called climate strategy report at the time. Now we've renamed that to our sustainability report, but it's the same idea. I think as everyone knows who follows the company closely, we have an ESG component baked into our DNA. It's a big part of who we are and what we do. And last year we started by really putting that down on paper, doing a full GHG emissions study. We hired an outside firm called Guidehouse. This year, we've done the work internally. We have a sustainability consultant who works very closely with the company. He's done the accounting, the greenhouse gas emissions accounting, and has put together, the math is essentially for how much emissions we have. Then we've taken that and given it to an outside verifier, an outside firm. They've checked it and have signed off on it. So that's been the process, and we're happy to be putting the report out today. Before we get into the details of the report, just a quick word about our vision: transforming and democratizing the global financial ecosystem for a more equitable and sustainable world. Obviously, ESG is part of that, and that's why we're talking about this today. But also, transforming the global financial ecosystem and making things more equitable for people. And we believe that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are doing that by essentially kind of rewiring the financial system. And to be part of that, to be the main or part of the main validation network of the biggest cryptocurrency network is what we do on a daily basis, on top of everything else that we're doing with Argo Labs, etc. So the headline of the report is that we are climate positive. Again, this is for the second year. We were climate positive in 2020, and now we are climate positive in 2021. What does it mean to be climate positive? It means that we've gone beyond achieving net zero carbon emissions to actually address all of our greenhouse gas emissions and then go beyond. We have primarily mitigated our scope two GHG emissions and our scope 3 emissions. I'll talk about the difference between those and how we've mitigated both those in a minute. And that goes both, that's for 2021, and then obviously we did that in 2020. So as of all the way back to 2020, we are carbon neutral or even beyond that, climate positive. We're also a member of the UN FCCC Climate Neutral Now initiative, which as part of that initiative, we have agreed and committed to measuring, reducing, and reporting our emissions on an annual basis to help the globe achieve climate neutrality by 2050. So that's another big part of what we're doing with our sustainability efforts. All right, next slide is a message from yours truly. There's two different pages where I kind of just talk a little bit about why we're doing what we're doing. It's similar to a lot of the context that I'm giving as part of this video. Just would bring your attention to the second page. There's some interesting numbers. So we saw a decrease in our emissions per dollar revenue even as we grew. So obviously 2021 was a huge year of growth for us. We started building Helios. We added a lot of staff. But even as we grew as a company, our emissions per dollar revenue went down 59%. And our emissions per staff member also decreased 89%. So we are definitely trying to be more efficient as we grow and continue to build in an intelligent way. All right, next slide is kind of just a quick overview before we get into the numbers. The main effort for us or the main way in which we are taking action against climate change is setting up in areas with lots of renewable power. That's why we're in Quebec. Obviously, a huge part of cryptocurrency mining is power and having access to power. That's why we're in Quebec. That's why we're in Texas. The photo on the left part of the screen is actually the windmill farm that's called the McAdoo Wind Farm, which is not far from our Helios facility in West Texas. You guys have probably heard me say 85% of the power in the west load zone where we are located is coming from renewable power. So big part of us is, what we're doing is making sure we're in the right place. But then any additional emissions that we have above and beyond that, we are mitigating through, making sure we know how much we're doing, how much we're emitting, and then taking measures to mitigate that. So how do we mitigate? How do we become climate positive? Number one, as I just said, minimize our emissions, make sure we're in the right place, make sure we're using energy efficient machinery and as much as we can. Part of that is also, putting in an immersion facility, which is more efficient because the miners, are cooled more effectively with the fluid. Scope 1 emissions is not an issue for us. We don't really have any Scope 1 emissions because we don't create our own power. And we don't have a large vehicle fleet. I think we have one pickup truck now we have two vehicles, I think, in Texas. Those were purchased in 2022. This is the report from 2021. So there will be some minimal Scope 1 emissions from 2022. But again, primarily when we're talking about emissions with Argo, it's Scope 2 and Scope 3. So and maybe just a quick kind of reminder of what Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are. Scope 1 is direct emissions that you're producing yourselves. Scope 2 and 3 are both indirect. So Scope 2 is from energy generation or energy usage. Not energy generation, from energy usage. And Scope 3 is sort of value chain. Where we're purchasing things, where we're building things, etc. Those are Scope 3 emissions. So for our Scope 2 emissions, we've purchased renewable energy credits, also known as RECs, either at our facilities or facilities that were hosted. In this case, in 2021, with Core Scientific, they were our main host, and those are those are offsetting any of the power that's not coming from non-renewable sources or non-clean sources. And Scope 3 emissions are for activities in the value chain, like buying machinery, shipping machinery, transportation associated with that. So there's some calculations that you do. So for instance, bringing 30,000 machines from Bitmain, that has an associated emissions number that would come with it, because those machines are being transported primarily from air. In our case, we fly most of our machines from Asia, so we have to make sure that we're kind of offsetting any of those emissions. Then for offsetting, we also purchase verified emission reductions, also known as VERs, and then we kind of over mitigate by going above and beyond being carbon neutral by purchasing more than we actually need to just offset and be neutral. And then the last part is third-party validation. I mentioned this earlier. We send off the math to an outside third-party firm. They check the numbers and make sure that we've done our calculations correctly, as per the general standardized way in which emissions are accounted for. All right, so what do the results look like for 2021 in terms of the actual GHG accounting, taking a look at all of our emissions for the year? The first is Scope 1 emission results. There are none. As I said, it's not something that is significant for us because we don't generate our own power. Or really have a large or any fleet of vehicles in 2021. In terms of Scope 2 results, which is electricity generation, that is where most of our GHG emissions come from. That's from electricity use, from obviously some of the facilities that we are running, that we were being hosted at rather in the United States, were not from entirely renewable sources or from clean power sources. So there was some from renewable energy credits that were applied at those facilities for the emissions from the power that was coming from those. And then in our Scope 3 emissions, that again came from our capital goods related to machines that we were buying and shipping over from Asia, as well as construction efforts at the Helios facility in Texas. So that's kind of big picture what the results are. Going into the nitty gritty, this is what we forecasted, what our 2021 emissions were going to look like. So if you go back to our 2021 report and you dig into it, you'll see these were the numbers that we put out. We were projecting at that time about 82% of our GHG emissions would be from electricity use. That has actually, you'll see in the next slide, gone down because of the work that we were doing at Helios and also with the machines coming from Asia. So if I skip ahead to our actual emissions from scope 2 and scope 3, you can see that about 66% of our GHG inventory was from electricity use, and then about 34% was from capital goods, fuel and energy related activities, and the like. So that's ultimately what the numbers came out at, and because of that, we had to make a few adjustments for 2021 in terms of our our renewable energy credits and our verified emission reductions, but we weren't that far off in terms of what we projected what they would look like. You can see if you skip back with about 57,000 tons was projected, and it was actually around 92,000 tons. So there was an adjustment in terms of purchasing renewable energy credits and verified emission reductions. Just to recap on our Helios efforts, because that was obviously a big part of those scope 3 emissions. We commenced mining there in May of this year, started construction around this time, around August of last year, July, August of last year. And the goal is to get 200 megawatts up and running by the end of this year. And again, have set up in an area where there's an enormous amount of wind power that's being generated into the ERCOT grid, which we're a part of. So to summarize kind of the three kind of main pieces of this particular sustainability report. One, we've gone again beyond achieving just net zero to become climate positive or carbon negative. Two, we've mitigated our scope 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emissions again for a second year. And then lastly, we are a member of a number of different groups, but probably the most significant is the UNFCCC Climate Neutral Now initiative, and have committed as part of that initiative to measure, reduce, contribute, and report our emissions on a yearly basis, and hence this report that is coming out today. So that's the kind of report. What do things look like moving forward? Obviously, we are continuing to think about our ESG efforts, to continuing to innovate, want to continue to be a leader in the space. This is, as I said at the start, something that's baked into our DNA. We're proud of kind of being a leader in the space, and we plan to continue to do that. So thank you if you've listened to this far, thank you for taking the time to get an update on our ESG efforts and to read through the sustainability report with me. And we look forward to talking to you guys again soon. Onwards and upwards.